Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, in which we bring you our daily dose of news and views covering the topics we hope are relevant to you. Well, today we have an absolutely packed show for you, which includes a look at how Sikh issues are now hitting the mainstream media. We also look at how Australian Sikhs have been suffering extensive transnational repression. And yes, Nikhil Gupta has finally been extradited, and we have footage of that very thing, so do keep watching for all that. And joining me on Perspectives, as always, is our very own correspondent in Canada for Satellite TV News, James Cousineau. James, good morning.
Good morning, Angus. Great to be here, and thanks again to all of our viewers for joining us once again.
And together we will, of course, be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And we've had a barrage of great comments from you from our last couple of shows, which we'll discuss. And of course, we'll be continuing our day-by-day look back 40 years ago to the terrible events of 1984. So do stay tuned for that. So sit back, relax, and to kick us off, James, as always, what have you got for us today?
Well, of course, there's much talk about Nikhil Gupta being extradited from the Czech Republic to the United States, where he has made his first court appearance in front of the judge and has, of course, as expected, pled not guilty. So as most people are aware, and if you're not, then we'll fill you in here in that he was accused or is accused of a murder for hire plot in partnership or in connection to a very high-ranking government official in India. So this has many ramifications for the international community, including here in Canada, where we have recently celebrated or acknowledged the anniversary of the death of Mr. Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Now, the individual that was extradited, as I said, had been accused of the planned assassination of a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil. And for me personally, I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Panun when he was at the referendum vote in Surrey, British Columbia, and I'm glad to see that he is safe and doing well and following his passion, which is the referendum vote and making sure that people have their voices heard. I'm going to switch over here to a video of him being extradited, and here he is surrounded by police, of course the NYPD, as well as they are in Prague to pick him up and extradite him back to the United States. Whether or not this is an FBI or federal government jet or what plane he was on, I'm not exactly clear, but something I found interesting, of course, when you watch this footage here, you'll be able to see, and of course it buffers here on us, but you'll be able to see the NYPD logo here and then the Red Rum New York. Not to be confused with the Red Rum Motorcycle Club in New York. This is actually a group of 3 law enforcement agencies that are very high in very high-profile cases, especially to deal with extreme violence, to deal with drugs and narcotics, and other major cases. So that's where Red Rum comes in. It's a specialized task force comprised of the State Drug Enforcement Program, the State Police, and the NYPD. So that's where the Red Rum New York shirt comes from. Now, if this is, as always, the fact, with very few exceptions, the New York police would have him here in the shackles, escorting him onto the plane, but they would not be armed. As you watch the footage, which you'll see on the screen, you can see that there are armed officers on the tarmac for the runway, and they are there as a guide for security and to make sure that they are prepared for anything in this situation. The NYPD and U.S. officials would not be armed. They are not carrying firearms. The individual would be shackled, both with his hands in front of him and then, of course, his ankles shackled with a waist belt. And I'm assuming that's what we're seeing here in the orange, or it could just be something else. But he would be shackled around the waist with the cuffs in front of him, and that's instead of behind for a long flight for comfort, so that he can eat or drink. And also because when he's boarding the plane, he'll be taking the stairs, and if he falls forward, at least he's able to give some protection there. But I found it interesting that that the NYPD officer, the task force officer, was wearing a red rum New York shirt with a body there. So I think that makes a big statement about what kind of cases they deal with. Now, as stated, he has appeared in front of the courts in New York. The U.S. judiciary is now responsible for carrying out the judicial process, and the individual has been put over and held in custody until his next appearance on June the 28th of 2024. He, as I said, pled not guilty. He is in custody in the Metropolitan Detention Center in New York. And as Angus and I discussed last night or yesterday on the show, it's assumed that he will have a very isolated existence there because, of course, his security is the responsibility of the U.S. Bureau of Prisons, and they want to make sure that he makes it to trial, unlike other cases where people have been mysteriously, we'll just say that their lives were cut short while they've been in custody. So they want to make sure that they protect him, and they also want to make sure that they get any information that is pertinent to foreign interference or involvement of representatives of the India government. So that's where we're at this point. We will definitely be keeping you up to date on this situation as it transpires. We will keep you updated on the 28th after the court appearance and make sure that you know as well as we do what's going on. But again, it's another big hit towards the assassinations and extrajudicial killings that have been happening around the world and the attempted assassinations of leaders, not only in the Khalistan referendum and the Khalistan movement, but in the Sikh community as a whole. So it's very important that this court case and this process be carried out with the utmost respect for law, for the rule of law, which many governments are still trying to help India to understand the rule of law when it comes to the courts, the criminal system, and the laws of foreign nations. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Angus, and by all means, share your thoughts on this situation.
Yeah, how interesting seeing all the combined forces of US law enforcement rolling out this well-practiced mechanism, their practical application of what they do. I mean, it's seeing this team, this Red Rum team, clearly they're very experienced, very practiced, and very effective at what they do. And this implies so many hidden layers of what's actually been going on.
Very elite team.
Yeah, I mean, there must be an awful lot that's been going on behind the scenes, away from the public eye. Obviously, we know that they've been trying to extradite Mr. Gupta, but here we see it in full force, the US law enforcement, with all these different departments, all combining, all working together, all collaborating to one very effective end. Of course, the big question is, will they stop at Nikhil Gupta? And there's another question, or another point that you've raised, James, that we don't maybe talk about enough, is, of course, there is a potential threat to Gupta's life. He could sing like a canary. He knows all the secrets, or he certainly knows enough secrets and enough evidence to imply or to prove that his instructions came from very high up the Indian state chain of command. So that will be very interesting to see what happens, James.
It will, and as I said, it's very essential that they get to the bottom of it and get all information they can. And I know in Canada, with the 4 individuals charged in the Najjar case, I'm sure they have very high level of security around them as well, especially with a high-profile stabbing of a serial killer in the Canadian prison system recently. That individual died from their injuries after being stabbed in the head with a broken broom handle. So, of course, the Canadian system is also far from perfect in keeping inmates secure and safe.
Yeah, will India have the capability and the will to potentially assassinate Mr. Gupta? We will see. Let's hope not. Okay, well, let's move on to my first story. And this is an interesting one because most of the Sikh issues that we raise on a daily basis, quite often they don't reach the mainstream media. But we have seen this pattern developing over recent months, and particularly since this affair of transnational repression has hit the headlines, that even now the mainstream are covering so many of these issues. And I want to show you today a video, just a very short couple of minutes video. This is Sky News. Sky News is one of our main news outlets here in the UK, and of course they broadcast in Australia and elsewhere, but Sky News is probably the second most watched news channel here in the UK. And this is their coverage of the events over the weekend, in which we of course had our commemoration to the 1984 genocides. Let me just show you this, and on this video you will get a feeling of just how mainstream these issues are becoming. This is the journalist, is a gentleman called Amrit Singh Mann. He's a very well-respected Sikh journalist, and he now works for Sikh News.
Well, thousands have gathered here in the capital today for an issue that is of huge significance to the Sikh community. They're here for more than one reason. They're here to commemorate a massacre that occurred 40 years ago, which resulted in the death of thousands of civilians. But they're also here because they want clarity on what the British government's involvement was with the attack. So to take you back, in 1984, the Indian Army stormed the holiest shrine for Sikhs, that's the Golden Temple in Amritsar, with the aim to remove armed Sikh dissidents who sought the creation of a homeland in Punjab. Now, the Indians have said in the past that the operation was carried out against militants and not against the Sikh community. Now, what was revealed 10 years ago was that the British government at the time, under Margaret Thatcher, sent a special forces officer from the SAS to help guide the Indian government with the attack. The people here believe that there is much more to be unveiled, and there is anger about it. But they hope that if there is a change in government here, it will be an opportunity for more secrets to come to light. Labour already committing to a public inquiry into Britain's role. I'm joined now by Dabinderjit Singh of Sikh Federation UK. Dabinderjit, just tell us, what would further disclosures mean to the Sikh community?
I think 40 years later, we're hopeful an incoming Labour government will give us the truth of the UK government's involvement. But ultimately, it's about justice and freedom. And we don't think we will ever get justice in India until we have our own Sikh homeland.
Well, thank you for talking to us. The crowd is currently marching its way towards Trafalgar Square, where an open rally will be taking place. For Sikhs here today, they'll be hoping to raise more awareness around the events that took place in 1984, which remains the most traumatic point in modern-day Sikh history.
Wow, how about that? All the key issues currently bubbling away in the Sikh community on mainstream news. And of course, Amrit Singh Mann interviewing Dabinderjit Singh, and I'll just highlight here, tomorrow we'll be uploading my interview with Dabinderjit himself. And if you're interested in all things Khalistan, he makes some very interesting revelations, and we'll discuss all sorts of things that you really need to watch tomorrow. So do keep an eye out for that. But here on mainstream British TV, all the key elements that we've been talking about, and many of them still potentially controversial. He's talking about the UK government. What was the UK government's involvement in 1984? This is a very dangerous topic for the British establishment, because clearly they're trying to keep under wraps what their involvement was. We think we know, or evidence has been revealed, that the SAS were involved in advising the Indian government on the attack on the Golden Temple. And here, mainstream media, that very same accusation being broadcast. It's great stuff, James, isn't it?
The times are changing, Angus, and people are demanding to get behind the stories and actually get to the truth for a change. So it's a great narrative to see, and it was just wonderful to see the police officers marching with them, just everybody in solidarity and peaceful protest. I love it.
And of course, the audience of Sky News are not just the Sikh community, it's the whole of the UK. So this big issue that has obviously been such a huge obsession, and I use that word in the right way, it is a justified obsession by the Sikh community. It's now being broadcast to the rest of the UK, who probably don't even know what happened in 1984. And here it is writ large, with all the controversies attached, for the British audience, which is great news. So it's very pleasing to see Sky News covering that. Of course, the BBC have covered it as well. So I want to rattle on to our second story.
Absolutely, and Sky News has reached.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, we are pressed for time.
So Sky News has reach in Canada as well. So
there you go. Couldn't put it better myself. So I want to rattle on to story 2 because we are pressed for time because we have so much to pack into today's show. This is an article. This is an investigative report by ABC News. That's the Australian broadcasting company. And this is an investigation led by Ivani Diaz. Now, she is a lady who has looked to great lengths into many issues affecting the Sikh community, not just in Australia, but across the diaspora, and particularly in the Punjab. And she's exposed India's targeting of Australian Sikhs and attempts to steal classified airport security info, amongst many things. I just want to share this article with you. It's a very long article, and again, I want to whip through it and just read out some of the highlights that she's picked up, that this investigative team have picked up. And it's very relevant to, of course, Australian Sikhs, but it's exactly the same for Sikhs in the UK, in Canada and the US. So this article, Harjinder Singh is one of the gentlemen, one of the Sikhs that she interviewed. So his phone rang while he drove his taxi around Melbourne. It was a man he'd never met, speaking Punjabi, with a veiled threat: stop the referendum going ahead or the result will be bad. This is in January last year. This is before Nijar's murder. This is just before the referendum, the Khalistan referendum, being rolled out in Australia. Clearly, Indian agents are now already intimidating Khalistani campaigners. I got a call at midnight. I was scared. You're not listening to us, so be careful, said this agent. Again, threatening. Then he said Indian authorities sent people to his parents' home in the Punjab saying they should get their son to stop his activism in Australia. This reflects such a cowardly, nasty tactic that the Indian intelligence services and law enforcement have been rolling out. Khalistani campaigners across the diaspora in the in the UK, in Canada, in the US, of course, many of them have families back in the Punjab. Now, these campaigners are out of reach, or so we believe, in the diaspora, but of course their families are vulnerable back in the Punjab. And it just rolls out day after day evidence that Indian law enforcement, the Indian state, are intimidating these families back in the Punjab who are completely vulnerable. They said, we got orders from the Indian authorities. If anyone's doing the opposite against the country, we got orders to kill them, Harjinder said. His parents were scared. And of course, 2 months later, Khalistani activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar was executed. So these threats were real. These weren't idle threats. As the federal government embraces Modi and his administration as an important partner, the long arm of the Indian state is reaching Australia, silencing critics, threatening members of the diaspora. A Four Corners investigation has uncovered the promotion of far-right Hindu ideology. Here we go. This is the Hindutva. This is the extremist nationalists that are driving this agenda. So their investigation uncovered the promotion of far-right Hindu ideology, a quiet amassing of political power, and never before reported details of a nest of spies. So in secret, though, Australia was unhappy with India's spy operations in Australia. Intelligence officers of India were trying to gain access to sensitive defence technology, airport security protocols. They were targeting former and current politicians, as well as state police. Crucially, they were also accused of monitoring the Indian-Australian community. And the Australian intelligence chief, Mike Burgess, he said, we confronted the foreign spies and we professionally removed them. So they've been kicked out of Australia for this activity. And Four Corners confirmed at least 4 intelligence officers were asked to leave. Some had been posing as diplomats in India's High Commission. This, again, details yet another tactic that's been uncovered in the Americas, in both Canada and the US, that clearly India's intelligence services are using their consulates, their offices, diplomatic offices, to run these operations. They're using it because they know they've got immunity within the embassies, and they're using these embassies and these consulates as bases of illegal operations, knowing they can't be touched. The Greens in Australia said that Australia should have condemned India. It would have sent a message to the diaspora communities that we've got your back, that Australia is protecting their Sikh community. India is on par with countries such as Russia and China, notorious for breaking protocols. In Modi's telling, it's defending the country from separatist groups, which his administration has labelled terrorist. Once again, this reference to Khalistani campaigners who are political opponents. They're labelling them as terrorists to somehow justify this activity of assassination. The memo described Nijar as an extremist. They refer to Gurpatwan Panoon. Again, these two very high-profile Khalistan campaigners, they are being labelled as terrorists, unjustifiably so. And then one of these gentlemen says, I think in Australia it's brewing. They're already here, the Indian agents. They're already interfering. It's very dangerous for the Sikh community. If it's not stopped, Australia could be Canada in a few years. And there's a pattern of threats against Australian critics. Indian authorities have visited their families in India and threatened them. How familiar that is. Detained in India and questioned after accusations they're involved in the Khalistan movement. Again, Western Khalistani campaigners experienced this. One man said he'd received calls from an Indian intelligence officer while in Australia. Threats again over the phone. Criminal charges in India when he didn't stop his Sikh activism in Australia. This is deterring Indians from returning from their homeland because they fear being arrested or worse if they return. The Indian diaspora is now one of the largest in Australia, second only to those born in the UK. It's become a powerful force for Modi and the BJP. Now, interestingly, this refers to the Overseas Friends of the BJP, the OFBJP. And they've been tasked with basically infiltrating Australian politics. We've seen this in Canada, where the recent inquiry has revealed evidence and essentially proved that India has interfered in Canadian politics. It's been doing it in Australia. And this OFBJP have successfully lobbied councillors. In the past 5 years, Indian Australians made up a substantial portion of the new members in about half of the branches of Hawke's electorate. That's the government, ministerial level this is. Talks about these youth camps set up by the RSS. The RSS has a sister group in Australia called the Hindu Swayam Sevak Sangh, or the HSS, which has at least 30 branches across Australia and runs camps for kids and adults. And they said they saw children being instructed to chant a slogan that translated as "India belongs to the Hindus." Again, this extremist nationalist agenda. One of them, MS Golwalkar, said minorities such as Muslims were a threat to India. The country could learn from the Nazis killing the Jews. Wow! Now, many of our guests here on the channel have referred to Modi's regime, particularly the RSS, as essentially Nazis, modern-day Nazis. Now, it's quite an accusation, but here the RSS themselves are comparing themselves to the Nazis. This is big stuff. HSS are teaching these children this martial art called Danda, and this involves using sticks. And these sticks have been used by the Hindu nationalist mobs in anti-Muslim riots in India. Again, it's very sensitive, very provocative. And it wraps up this investigation by saying, we have a very recent case study in Australian history about what happens when all you see is money and trade and a growth economy, and you don't see any of the kind of concerns. We did it with China. Turns out we're repeating the same mistakes with India, and that's just setting us up for trouble. Again, this old argument, is it human rights or is it trade? Is it dollar or is it human rights? It's a very interesting article, James. All same old issues, isn't it?
It is. It's just repetition over and over.
Absolutely. Right, anyway, let's move on to our next segment, and I want to cover, of course, your comments. And as I mentioned in the opening, we have been bombarded with some fabulous comments. Do keep them coming. But I want to look at, firstly, from our story where we covered the revelations that Nikhil Gupta had at last been extradited. User SG something or other said, centuries will pass by, but Sikhs will never be served any justice. After all, they are expecting the justice from those who intentionally did this to them. Yeah, this is where India are the defendant, they are the judge and the jury. How can we expect justice from the Indian state when they were behind so many of these things? They refer to many of the victims still struggling to even get the death certificates for their relatives. So this opens up so many issues. There are so many victims of 1984 on so many levels. The perpetrators still facing justice. The perpetrators are still walking around. They haven't faced justice. And there are still people in prison who were imprisoned in those years after 1984 who stood up for Sikh rights, who stood up for this outrage And they were targeted in the 10, 12 years afterwards, in that dreadful period when over 100,000 young Sikh men and women disappeared, just vanished. And we know what happened to them, these extrajudicial killings that we talk about on a regular basis. So that's a powerful comment, James.
Right.
And then, yeah, what about the masterminds? Yeah.
It speaks volumes.
It is. Now, again, we talk about Good and Gummins referred once again to, what about the masterminds? Yeah, we've got Nikhil Gupta, great. What about CC1? What about Samant Gul? What about Ajit Doval? And what about Mr. Narendra Modi himself? How far will the US government go how far will they go up the chain to achieve justice? That's a very good point. The next story we want to talk about was His Death Changed the World. This was our, we gave a bit of a tribute to Hardeep Singh Nijjar. And D. Harminder Sekond, please do like if you read our comments. I wanted to highlight this one because, yes, of course we read your comments. That's why we like to talk about them and we do welcome them. And I think, James, you yourself have even responded to this one overnight.
I did. We appreciate all of the comments that are sent, and we do take the time to read them.
Of course we do. So yes, we do read your comments and thank you for them. Do keep them coming. Gives us more to talk about. Now, your serious comment here was Indian government has decreased the reach of all such YouTube channels. Yes, this is a problem that we have. We want our audience to be in the Punjab, but we're not allowed to broadcast in the Punjab. Why? Because India does not have a free press. Indian state has a lot to hide. They don't like to hear, or they certainly don't want what we say to be heard by the people of India. Why not? They're not a democracy. How can they call themselves a democracy if they fear a difference of opinion? In the UK, in the US, in Canada, we have all sorts of opposition who say the most outrageous things. But we defend their right to say these things. They have an absolute right to say them. I might find them offensive. The British government might find it offensive. But I can stand up and I can say to the British government, you're all crooks, you're all corrupt. And I can say that freely because I live in a democracy. James, of course, can say it in Vancouver against Justin Trudeau. And he will not get locked up because he lives in a democracy. Why then are channels like ours blocked in India? What are you afraid of, Mr. Modi? Final comment here. India also actually killed...
He would like us blocked in other countries too.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me about it. And this comment here, India also actually killed lawyer actor Deep Sidhu and, of course, Sidhu Moosewala. I wanted to highlight this comment because these are two gentlemen that died under suspicious circumstances recently, actually last year, I believe it was. It was only just after we'd started this channel, and we actually haven't given them enough time. So thank you for that comment. It does raise both of them, and it actually gives us a little reminder that maybe we should cover their stories in a little bit more detail and highlight to the world just what happened to those gentlemen. So our third set of comments, this was after our story about Nijjar amongst many others, and one of our regular contributors, Amrit Pal 4964, just raised a very touching tribute, and of course he does highlight the very valuable work that Nijjar did within his community. Of course, he lived by the central tenets of Sikhi. He expounded those values in everything that he did. And of course this comment is a very nice touching tribute which highlights the very things that Mr. Nijjar did. He was not a terrorist, he was a simple Sikh who lived by Sikh values and who just basically campaigned for the right to have his own homeland. In other words, a very decent human being who was murdered by a state that didn't agree with him. Then the final comment here, it's unbelievable that it has been a year since Mr. Nijjar's assassination. The culprits are not charged yet. Panic not. This is a huge investigation. And actually 4 men now have been charged. And thank you for this comment. It highlights the frustration that many of us have and in the community. Why is it taking so long? The reason is because this investigation ties into Gurpatwant Singh Pannoon's investigation that the US Department of Justice are looking into. All these law enforcement agencies and the intelligence services are working hand over fist behind the scenes. There's an awful lot going on that we don't know here in the public domain. And that's the reason why they've managed to get hold of Gupta and extradite him, because they're all working quietly behind the scenes. So patience is the word. They will get there. Right, for our final section, and again, turning serious again. Once again, we'd like to take a look back at 1984 and our day-by-day detailing of events that went on through those days in June in 1984. As always, crediting the National Sikh Youth Federation for their wonderful detailed narrative. And today, we're going to take a look at, this is the aftermath of those awful days and the awful massacre that took place. This is the 8th of June. And this was a British writer's description in 1904 of Sikh rebels during the Mughal rule riding towards the Golden Temple on hearing of it being attacked. Bands of Sikh horsemen were to be seen riding at full gallop towards Amritsar, running the gauntlet of Mohammedan troops. The message would be sent round the distant villages: "Who will ride tonight? Death was a martyr's crown on such occasions." Now this is relevant because this reflects, many years later, 1984, what also happened in the aftermath of the attack of Operation Blue Star. So among the tragic outcome of the Blue Star attack was the reaction and the revolt of Sikh troops. Although there was a media blackout in Punjab, rumours of the assault on the Daba Sahib managed to leak out, and over 5,000 Sikh soldiers spontaneously deserted their regiments in a bid to get to Amritsar. These soldiers are affectionately called Dharmi Faujis, which loosely translated means soldiers of faith. Every Sikh soldier swears an oath that he would not let any harm come to Sri Guru Granth Sahib first, before swearing an oath that he would not let any harm come to India. Had there not been a media blackout and false government propaganda, the scale of rebellion would have been much, much larger. The government initially didn't publicise the revolt. They didn't admit the revolt, and even later referred to the troops as having deserted rather than mutinying. It's interesting to note that prior to the attack, the Sikh regimental centre was deliberately shifted outside of Punjab to Uttar Pradesh. And by comparison, the Bihar regimental centre is located in Bihar, the Rajputana Rifles based near their home in Delhi. And this clearly shows the intention of the government and their view of Sikhs. Military analysts have commented that although the Sikhs that defended the Golden Temple complex kept the army at bay for over a week, had the Sikh regiment been stationed in Punjab, the outcome of the battle could have been very different, implying there that, of course, they would have come to the defence of the temple. The Indian government was well prepared, and the army had already been deployed to check the advances of the rebel Sikh troops who were travelling thousands of miles from 9 different states towards their ancestral homeland. Although desperately outnumbered, the Sikh soldiers faced the Indian army and fought gun battles in Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra and Gujarat, in which hundreds of Sikhs were killed by the military. Those that survived or were captured were dishonourably discharged from the army, stripped of all their privileges and pensions, and imprisoned between 5 to 10 years. And after leaving prison, many had to work as manual labourers to support their families. If they'd stayed in the army, they would have enjoyed high-ranking positions and state pensions. Nonetheless, they are proud men and do not regret their decisions. The courage and dedication shown by the rebel Sikh troops is awe-inspiring. Facing impossible odds, they did not hesitate to stake everything in an attempt to protect their faith and their nation. And it's on record that, in stark contrast to their government, who was indiscriminately massacring Sikhs, the Sikh soldiers engaged only with the army, and no civilians were reported to have been harmed. A call to arms, really, wasn't it, at the time, James? A call to arms for Sikhs all round, and the Indian government did everything, knowing full well that the Sikhs, being an honourable, a combined nation, that they would have rushed, the Sikh soldiers would have rushed to the defence of their most sacred site.
Absolutely, and it still breaks your heart today knowing all of the innocent lives that were taken in that genocide. Indeed.
But there we must leave it. And that was Perspectives. And just to let you know, there will be no Perspectives over Thursday or Friday. As I've mentioned, we will have 2 very interesting interviews uploading. We've got Devinderjit Singh, and if you're interested in all matters relating to Khalistan, do watch that interview. That'll be uploaded tomorrow. And on Friday, we'll be uploading Bhajan Singh Binder. He is a military expert, a very well-researched gentleman. And again, if you're interested in Operation Blue Star and some very interesting revelations about all the preparations that the Indian government did about the assault, and it's quite revealing, that interview will be. So I do urge you to watch that. That will be uploaded on Friday. Of course, please don't forget to keep those comments coming in. We do read each and every one of them, and we do appreciate them. And of course, you can message us directly at message@satellitetv.com on any news items that you think we should be covering. But in the meantime, thank you very much for watching Perspectives. It's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from James.
Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for watching.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.